Welcome to the Scholars Chair. Tonight, a conversation with the Director of the Institute of Policy Research and Catholic Studies, Dr. Stephen S. Schneck. Along with him is the Director of the Minaret of Freedom Institute, Dr. Ahmed. At Focus, Religious Freedom in Our American Democracy, right here on the Scholars Chair. Welcome to the Scholars Chair, everybody. I want to ask the first question. The program and discussion is about religious freedom in American democracy. The first question to you is, why is religious freedom in America important, relevant? Dr. Schneck.
Well, I think that it's important for democracy, clearly. At least in my understanding of democracy, democracy requires from its citizenry a certain set of fundamental values and virtues to make it work. Some of them are pretty obvious. You know, we have to expect that citizens are going to be true with one another. We have to expect that citizens are going to operate according to rules of due process and so on and so forth, and many other values as well. So where do those values come from? I don't think they can be generated by democracy itself. I think that would be a vicious sort of circle. So they need, in a way, to proceed or come from outside democracy someplace. And I'm convinced that one of the best sources for these values is actually religion, and I think in particular the free practice of religion is a real generator for the kinds of virtues that make democracy work.
Excellent. Dr. Minaret, same question. Religious freedom, why is it important to American democracy?
Well, I think it's bound up in the history of America. It's part of the fabric. You realize that the American Republic was founded by people who came from Europe, mainly over issues of religious persecution. Not perhaps exactly what the high school history books would have you believe, that they were people who were persecuted. In many cases, they were the persecutors, extremists, if you will, who were out to spoil the fun of the more mainstream religious types. But when they came to the United States, they were such a mixed bag of differing views that it became absolutely essential that they have to respect the rights of one another to differ on these questions in order to make the American project work at all. And so for that historical reason, I think you find it very, very fundamentally in the American Constitution, certainly, and in American values. And once it's in there, you have what for some people would be unexpected result, that you have a quite religious country, that the things that Steve was talking about begin to play an important role. People really are motivated, guided, and restrained by their religious values.
Awesome. I was just curious that this religious tension has always been present from the very beginning. This community of people of different religious faiths simply didn't get along too well for the first 50, 100 years. And we still are experiencing it now. People of different faiths are having difficulty getting along with each other. Of course, I don't have to tell you, Dr. Ahmed, and as well as Dr. Schneck, that the media at the moment is having a field day over the conflicts between the establishment of Islamic institutions, mosques, and so forth across the country. I think this is the first time I've ever experienced on the media actually a Muslim person being stabbed in this country. I mean, I've never seen that account before. So just give me your feedback on that. What's going on here?
No, well, certainly even after September 11th, the acts of individual violence against individuals there were I think, 2 Sikhs who were fatally attacked. No Muslim was fatally attacked, although one man was beaten very badly. So yes, it does seem as though this hostility toward Islam is reaching a new, even higher peak. And what is happening, I think, is that basically it's a politicization of the issue. After September 11th, what you had was a very strong incentive for the people in the administration to try to prevent the religious issue from being politicized. That's why George W. Bush went to a mosque to say Islam is not the enemy. However, now, at this time, you have the people who were in power then, the neoconservatives, are not in power now. And the current administration is a much more liberal administration. And therefore, they're looking for some emotional issue to rally people behind. And what is more emotional to people than religion? And if you can tie it into political issue, if you can tie it into terrorism, violence, women's rights, so, all kinds of neat issues that you can try to weave together in order to get people riled up, then of course one of the consequences, perhaps not the main consequence desired, but one of the consequences of that kind of rabble-rousing is going to be violence against individuals.
Yes. Follow-up question. That's just,
I was actually thinking as Deen was talking, in a way, the furor that we see, occurring now, fits into a kind of a pattern over American history. If you look as new religious groups begin to establish themselves in the United States, over the course of our history, there are periods in which there's a sharp reaction to these rising religious groups. It goes back to the very beginning when Jefferson is writing, for example, when for example, he writes about the famous wall, protecting, dividing church and state. He's writing at a time when new religious groups then, the Baptists and the Methodists, are being challenged by the Congregationalist and Presbyterian majorities and Church of England majorities in the other states. So there, and terrible violence was affected on these Baptists and Methodists during that time. I'm a Roman Catholic, in the 1840s, 1850s, and so on and so forth. Tremendous anti-Catholic sentiment in the United States. In one instance, a cannon was fired through a Catholic church while the congregation was inside. A convent was burned down, and so on and so forth, at the time when Catholic immigration to the United States was starting to really flow in great numbers. And we could think about similar groups, the Mormons in the middle part of the 19th century, Jehovah's Witnesses in the early part of the 20th century. This is kind of a pattern here. Certainly Jews have experienced their share of violent discrimination in the United States. So, I think that the furor that we're seeing now, the tensions between Islam and the rest of the United States, I think those tensions could valuably be set against this pattern. We think of ourselves as a very tolerant nation, but in fact we have a history of amazing religious intolerance. Maybe the good news is that we gradually do seem to get over it.
That's the follow-up question. Why isn't it? Why does it hold together? Why does this American experiment still is a cohesive system? And
well, if you're asking me, I think we owe a huge debt to a few of our framers and founders. People like Jefferson and Madison and George Mason that Deen and I were talking about before. They crafted a way of dealing with religious tensions in the American Republic that I think has proved to be remarkably resilient and effective at, over time, gradually dealing with these incidences of furor such as we're experiencing now.
I want to ask both of you the question about the value systems in your own traditions that provide some information that causes you to respect the traditions of the other. And I just want to explore that a little bit, and perhaps it would be useful for people of different faith traditions. What is it in Catholicism, for example, that would inform you to respect the traditions of Jew, Hindu, or Muslim?
The nature of the Catholic faith is that it's supposed to be Catholic. That is, it's supposed to be universal. So, at its core, Catholicism, imagines itself open to the world. And to the extent that Catholics in the world today are effectively practicing their faith, and they're practicing it in Africa and Asia and all over the world.
Sure.
They do so in a way that communicates with the local culture and the traditions and so forth in which it finds itself, and that requires a kind of an openness. To experiencing the other and differences and so on and so forth, that I think is, one of the hallmarks of the Catholic faith.
Interesting. Deen, same question.
Well, in the case of Islam, which is a religion that focuses very much on right action and proper behavior, one of the elements of Islamic teaching is to show a respect for people or at least tolerance of people of other religions. So that when it comes to the other Abrahamic faiths, in particular Judaism and Christianity, the Quran quite specifically gives them the honorific title of the people of the book, acknowledging that, at least in its original form, their revelation was a revelation from the same divinity that we worship, and that in principle they worship the same God we worship, and that their prophets are our prophets. In fact, I read an interesting op-ed piece by someone critical of the movement to burn the Quran, saying, wait, the book you're about to burn is about Jesus and about Moses and about John the Baptist. So
well said.
why stop, think about what you're doing. So that element is there. But even for those religious views which Muslims despise, we are still told to be tolerant, that the responsibility for each person is on themselves, and that even the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was told repeatedly in the Quran, we have sent you as a warner, you are not their warder, you are not their guardian, you are there to preach the clear message. So that certainly no Muslim has the right to intervene with others. And this is made quite explicitly in the verse that says no compulsion in religion, which seems to be sort of the bottom line. So you have, at a minimum, tolerance even for those views that we find despicable, and more frequently for those views that are just a little bit off, a matter of respect, and to say, to you your way and to me mine. Let us at least be consistent on those things that we have in common, which I think brings us back to Jefferson again, who made the comment that if only the religions of the world, if only the people of the world would follow those things in their religions that all religions have in common, think of how much better this world would be.
I think that some critics would say that religion is the source of violence, and I think that's been a criticism of all religions, but certainly in this current season that Islam is at the focus of this, and the criticism seems to have support. What are your feelings?
Yeah, I don't think that's really true. It's certainly easy to point to religious movements or even religious people who have been violent. But when you try to argue that violence comes from the religion, you come across two, in my opinion, insurmountable stumbling blocks. The first is if you seriously study the teachings of the religions, you will find that they don't teach violence in that way. For example, if you want to say that Jesus, peace be upon him, his teachings are responsible for the Crusades, and he'd only point to you that what Jesus said was to turn the other cheek, to love your enemies and to pray for your enemies. So it's a little hard to argue that he's what motivated that. Yes. Similarly with the Muslims, if you say that it's the teachings of Muhammad that are responsible for the World Trade Center, say, well, again, if you look at the Quran and the teachings of private teachings of Prophet Muhammad, his personal advice, it was always to avoid harming civilians at all costs, and to only fight against those who fight against you. And so on.
The idea of life is sacred.
And life is sacred. Yeah. Well, the Hindus. I think if one looks at the